All right, Mr. Chair, you are now live.
All right, thank you everyone for joining the February 4th meeting of the Planning Commission. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And Tammy, please call the roll.
Mr. Sale,
Present.
Mr. Wellman,
Present.
Mr. Klein,
Present.
Ms. Butler,
Present.
Mr. Imes.
Here.
Okay, wonderful. Looks like we have a quorum, and we'll go ahead through the made any changes other than the fact we're not going to hear the procedure, so we'll push that changes item. And I have no other further changes to the agenda. Does anyone else have any agenda before we move forward? Okay, I'd like to move for approval of the agenda. We have a second.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any oppositions? Okay, the agenda is passed as stands. Okay, now we'll move on to the next item, which is approval of minutes. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to review the minutes. Has anyone not received the minutes, Commissioner Wise? Okay, so please take a second to look at your minutes again from January 7th. And if there's any comments, let me know in the next 30 seconds or so. Otherwise, we'll take motions for approval of the minutes as published.
Move to approve.
Second.
All right, there's been a motion to approve in a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any oppositions? The minutes have passed. Okay, everyone give me a second to pull up the next part of the agenda item here. Okay, we'll move on to item D, new business for the Maritime Task Force update and the comprehensive plan update. Is there any reason to do the comp plan before the Maritime or vice versa? Please let us know. Otherwise, let's go ahead and proceed into Maritime. Okay, we're ready to go with the Maritime Task Force update.
Do we have everyone on? And Julian, my question is the mayor with us yet?
He is not.
So I will get started, and when the mayor comes on, you can just announce that he has joined us, and then I'll stop and we'll hear from the mayor. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Terrific. Well, good evening. We are delighted that the Planning Commission is having the Maritime Task Force here to hear about our great progress and us hear all of your terrific ideas and direction for the future of the task force. As you know, the city established a task force this fall, and the purpose of the task force was really threefold. First of all, to look at ways to actually strengthen and increase the presence of the maritime industry in Annapolis. Secondly, to figure out how our community can have greater access to the waterfront and the water. And third, to make sure that the maritime districts are sustainable into the future. So with that said, tonight you're going to hear from task force members who are residents, property owners, members of the maritime industry, the National Park Service, to tell you about their initial findings from our work session this past Friday. We'd like to let each one of them give you their recommendations so that you can hear all of the recommendations and hear the common themes. As soon as we hear all those presentations, then we will turn it over to the commission. We're anxiously awaiting your questions, your ideas. And if for those in the public who are on this call, please feel free to send in any of your questions or comments to the director, Sally Nash, at the Planning Department. So with that said, next slide, please. So this is the mayor's slide. I will very briefly tell you what he would say, but not as eloquently. And that is that the city has had a long-standing commitment to these maritime districts and to the industry. There was a transition report done for the mayor when he came into office 3.5 years ago. And the whole thrust of that report was to commit to the industry, celebrate the industry, and make Annapolis really a center for boating and service center as boats are going up and down the inland waterway. He sees it, and hopefully he'll join us, as a great opportunity right now to build on the success of City Dock and to really finally address the issue of accessing the waterfront. Next slide, please. So the Maritime Task Force has a whole wide range of stakeholders: residents, property owners, environmentalists, the Park Service, the maritime industry, tenants, businesses, public interest like the museum. So bringing all of these people with very different perspectives together, the purpose is for them to work together in teams and to really find common themes, build a consensus so that we can actually start to have clear actions at the end of this effort, which will be in May, clear actions to get the community onto the water and to create some flexibility with what we call complementary or contributing uses for the property owners, and to really refocus our efforts on the industry itself. Next slide goes to our planning director, Sally Nash.
Good evening. How is everyone? Well, I don't need to tell the Planning Commission about the comprehensive plan and what it is, but as you'll remember, in 2009, there was some policies about keeping and protecting the maritime industry. And that is still a really important policy that we're carrying forward to the next comprehensive plan. And so this effort is going to be part and parcel of that. We're not looking for a comprehensive rezoning of our maritime districts, but we're really looking at a way to strengthen the maritime industries in a way that will make them a better amenity for everyone who lives in the city, as well as the maritime owners and property owners and tenants. Next slide. Back to Eileen.
Sally, thanks so much. And again, this whole effort will be an amendment to the comprehensive plan. With that said, how did we get here? I think Will Scott is the only one on the call who was an active participant. I may be wrong in that. In 1987, when the maritime zoning came forward. The situation then was interesting. When I tell you what the issues were, you'll laugh because they're not so dissimilar. First, there was tremendous pressure on the waterfront. The city marina had just been built in the early 80s. Tecumseh had been built before that. The land prices for these, what were working boatyards, remember the city marina was built on the site of a working boatyard. The land prices were going through the roof. And what was happening is that the industry, the boatyards, the sail lofts, the services for the maritime industry were being pushed out because they couldn't compete with condominiums, hotels, office buildings. There was a large project called the Maritime Inn, Bobby Leonard's project, that came in on the site of what is now the Yacht Club, right at the corner next to the bridge. So all of that made the community feel, rightfully so, that the waterfront was going to be privatized, that it was going to be walled off, and that we would lose our maritime industry. Next slide. So with that said, what the city embarked on was a strategy, or really a process, for a couple of years involving, again, residents, the industry, owners, and a great amount of research. We went up to Newport, and the commission was very heavily involved in this. And an economic strategy was developed. And the thrust of it was, how do we retain our working maritime, which are our boat yards, our marinas, and provide enough land to support these uses that are necessary? When you think about a boat yard, think about the boat yard, John Norton's boat yard up at Yacht Haven. You've got a 30-ton lift. You need room for that. You need room for boat storage. So out of that effort came 4 very distinct different districts. Each one is very different than the other based on its location, what are the surrounding uses, but also what was there at the time. So we're going to quickly go through the 4 districts, because you'll see that 2 of them are very, very hard maritime. One of them, let's go to that district, the next slide. The city dock is really retail and a variety of uses, and then one of them is mixed, but they all had the same intent, and that was to keep out incompatible uses. Residential was seen as incompatible because where you have boat yards and you have residents next door, it's not a good mix. And competing uses such as office uses, the goal was to also keep those uses out as well. So the first district, which was WMC, the Conservation District, is at the city dock. You've got the Yacht Club, the hotel, Fleet Reserve, Yacht Basin, what was Fawcett's, what's now 110 Compromise. This is the most flexible district. It's 8.5 acres, 16 parcels. And the thrust of this district was to have a waterfront promenade to keep the maritime that was there, but provide flexibility if they would, as with 110 Compromise, create waterfront access. They could have reduced their maritime to 40%. The next slide, please. The next district is the mixed maritime. This is the most complex of the districts. It's from the bridge to First and from Severn to the water, 141 parcels, 17.5 acres. You've got the city marina, the yacht club, the yacht base, I was going to say the yacht basin, Templeton Marine Complex, Pier 4, Chesapeake Bay Trust, Yacht Haven. So you have, and you had in 87, interesting mix. The goal here was to keep those working yards, keep Templeton's backyard boats and the hard maritime uses they had, keep Yacht Haven. So the incentives you'll see in this district were geared toward subsidizing these uses. So with a 30-ton lift or a 20,000 square foot working yard or 25,000 square feet of on-land boat storage, which, for example, Templeton site has, you could get 30% non-maritime, which would include restaurants. The idea was to subsidize and support those working uses. Next slide. The next district, WME, Maritime Eastport, is interesting. It's in 3 locations. One immediately adjacent to the bridge, where you now have the the Annapolis Yacht Club, and you also have what was Sarles and Petrini's. Today, it is the South Annapolis Yacht Center. Then all the way on the other end of Severn Avenue, you have Severn Sailing and the Eastport Yacht Club. That's in WME. And then the backside of Eastport, all of those working marinas and working maritime services, 146 parcels, 27 plus acres. And again, the goal here, this was hard maritime. The goal was to keep those working yards, keep those services, the marinas, the sailing club, a little bit of flexibility for 1,000 square foot deli, or in conjunction with a working yard and the triggers of the size of the yard and the lifts, a 2,000 square foot restaurant, but primarily hard maritime. So next district is WMI. This district, again, hard maritime. This is the largest district in the city, 40 parcels, 60 acres. Port Annapolis, Jabin's Yard, Annapolis Landing Marina, land intensive working maritime sites, large boat yards. One is 20 acres, one is 17 acres. You're dealing with sizable sites. And the purpose here was to keep the land for these working yards, buffer the adjacent sites, and provide some support like pools, showers, delis for the marinas. So these districts, next slide, have served the city well. They were put into place in 1987. And since that time, there have been economic studies, maritime preservation analysis, demand and supply of recreational boating, a blue technology report, which Stephen Rice will talk to you about. And then most recently, the City Dock Consensus Plan. All of these efforts basically reinforced supporting the maritime districts, but the fact, as with the blue technology, there are some changes we need to be prepared for. Next slide, please. So where are we today? So the yellow in this chart is you. It's the Planning Commission. The blue, lighter blue, is the Maritime Task Force. So starting the end of November, there have been 2 large Maritime Task Force work sessions, and that includes the task force and all the working teams associated with the task force. In between these larger sessions, the second one being last Friday, we have working teams on various topics, which you'll hear today, the residents, people looking at the uses for flexibility, the industry, the water access groups. Those teams have been working and meeting and coming up with tangible actions and recommendations. So today or tonight, we're coming to the commission to share where we are, get your thoughts. We will also go to the city council, and then we will probably have at least 2 more task force meetings where we will then also come back to the commission. All of this culminates the end of May. In May, we hope that we have the support of the Planning Commission and the council with recommendations for a strategy for our maritime districts. Next slide, please. What you're going to hear tonight as we listen to all of the task force members are very different approaches. Wrong slide, very different approaches. But interestingly enough, you're going to hear common themes, which is what we were looking for, priorities that are common, some balancing of interest, and some initial agreements on the major areas of water access. What kind of uses do we think are contributing uses? What kind of significant triggers should be necessary to have these uses? How to incentivize waterfront access, and how to create a stronger industry. So with that said, the next slide, I'm going to turn this over to the superintendent of the Chesapeake Bay National Park Service, who's just been a terrific asset for all of us, Wendy O'Sullivan.
Thanks, Eileen. Good evening, everyone. Wendy O'Sullivan. I'm the superintendent for the National Park Service Chesapeake Bay office, and happy to be part of this effort. And our work group was focused on waterfront access. So next slide, we're gonna, both Eric and I will walk through the key areas that we worked on as a work group. And just want to start with our team focused on really understanding the big questions related to what constitutes water access, what are the different ways that the public is currently gaining connections to our waterfront. And what you see here in this map is just the start of cataloging the incredible assets that Annapolis has as this premier waterfront destination. And so the little yellow circles are classic street end parks. And what you also see is maybe a little, I'll talk a little bit later with the red dots. There are anchor locations right now that we hope to build upon. You see City Dock being one, and the big plans to revitalize City Dock, including a partnership with the National Park Service that I'll speak to in just a minute, as well as existing locations over in Eastport, including the Annapolis Maritime Museum, and building out the park that's on the peninsula off of Back Creek, the Ellen Moyer Park as well. And the group started by, like I said, doing this catalog of the existing opportunities. We also began to talk about what are the challenges, where are the ways that we can find these connections for the public. We really focused on how important creating these opportunities for access to the water are for the city itself, for the industries that work and align along the water, to create really vibrant programs and vibrant places for people to connect to the water, and by making sure that as we thought about this, we were also truly thinking about the industry itself. And so we did begin to think about opportunities for incentives by connecting to public water access, and to think about areas related to where maybe new opportunities might be to bring and extend the public onto the water. So we really thought about it in three ways. Opportunities to access the water from the land, to actually get out on the water. We thought about how to access Annapolis from the water, so coming in and accessing sort of water based to Annapolis. And then really this broader category of accessing the water from the land, but you're near it, you're by it, you're getting that authentic maritime experience without needing to actually go out on the water. So what I'll do is I'll pass it off to Eric to sort of talk about the hierarchy of ways we've thought about that access.
Yeah, next slide, please. So in kind of casting a wide net here on how we're thinking about access and really taking in all the perspectives of the task force members who represent ownership and tenants, residents, et cetera. This kind of ladder of access opportunities started to crystallize, where there are numerous opportunities. The challenges are real. There are liability concerns that were expressed, and we understand kind of how those work. And we started to look at ways of working around those. We investigated recreational use statutes that exist here in Maryland that provide for sort of informal public access that's not programmed, and ways in which that's been used in frankly a lot of non-urban areas, but are very applicable to urban contexts as well. And we started to look at, if we're trying to put a sort of expand on the access that's already there, these are the things that would really fill out a broad set of opportunities for waterfront access. And they may not be available or feasible at all locations in the districts, but the idea is that they might exist dispersed throughout the districts, and then together you kind of create a whole range of new opportunities. And so these are things that we're going to be looking at, as ways of providing other incentives for property owners. Next slide.
Great. So, this slide is really our way of showing both recommendations and opportunities. So some might wonder, what is the National Park Service role here? And I'd like to share and hope you've already heard some of the exciting things that are on the horizon for the National Park Service and Annapolis. We were involved in sort of behind the scenes, but helping to fund some of the city dock action plan work, in particular the public engagement side of that. We're really proud of where how collaborative that was, and the big plans to revitalize City Dock. In part, we have a really great partnership that's growing with the city of Annapolis. We're working on entering into a new partnership agreement. And what that would do is set in place just this exciting opportunity for the city of Annapolis to be the first, what we're calling the Chesapeake Gateway Community. So the National Park Service would become a long-term partner in the city. We're looking to help save and revitalize the Burtis House and Wharf, and have that really be a gateway to the bay. So when we're thinking about the water access components, it really is framed where there are these signature anchor places in Annapolis that can be better connected, that can support the other ways of accessing, that can connect our visitors and our local residents to the incredible range of businesses and experiences that are focused on the waterfront, and to provide an opportunity for the public to self-explore. So some of what we're thinking about are ways that we can knit together all of these individual water access points, identify where the gaps are, try to fill some of those gaps. And so we have a series of bullets here that are framing out things like looking into on-water commercial partnerships to really expand the ability to get people on the water and connected to the bay and to our creeks. The National Park Service is looking to bring funding and working with partners like the Annapolis Maritime Museum to bring programming into our waterfront spaces. And there's also opportunities that as a team we started to look at related to engaging with various funding sources to help with some of the infrastructure improvements that we might need at our end street parks and our street end parks. And if we needed additional assets and resources to really encourage both the awareness of and the access to the waterfront. So we're excited to, keep moving forward as a team. We're glad to hear that some of the other work groups had similar interest in weaving public access into the bigger solutions to sustain the maritime districts. And the Park Service is excited to be part of that and ready to bring some resources to help us achieve that together.
Wendy and Eric, terrific. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to hear from Susan Zellers, who's been meeting numerous times along with me with all of the maritime tenants, businesses, and industry. Susan.
Thank you. Can we start with the first slide? Next slide. So again, I'm Susan Zellers. Most of you know me. I'm the Marine Trades Association of Maryland's executive director. Our offices are located here in Annapolis, and we are located here probably because there's the largest concentration of maritime businesses in the state of Maryland here in the Annapolis area. So we did meet with a lot of the tenants and representatives of the industry from all of the different maritime districts, and we really heard loud and clear how delighted everyone was to see this as an opportunity and to see this as an opportunity for the maritime industry to grow stronger. So that was sort of the mindset of everyone as we moved forward. Where we are right now is with a loss of boat building and manufacturing, and that's kind of all over the state, and even some loss of service providers. And we've gotten to a point where we really can't afford to lose any more of those services and still maintain the strong maritime district that we have. These districts, as they've been put in place, are the reason that we can keep rents manageable, and it's the reason why we have such a cluster of maritime businesses here. We've almost developed what we're calling a marketplace here, different from any other city in Maryland. When you pull into it, you really can kind of get soup to nuts work done on your boats. Also, at this current state, we're seeing competing options for maritime businesses. We are seeing competition from other areas of the state, the Kent Narrows area, and we're also seeing competition from other states to come and move businesses out of this area. Next slide, please. So the good news is we're in a good position in the maritime industry right now. We have some great opportunities. 2020 and the pandemic was good to boat sales. We saw a 12% increase nationally in boat sales. That's a lot. And we saw a huge increase in first-time boaters. And we need to figure out now how to keep them boating and have them not sell their boat next year when we come out of this. But this presents us with a wonderful opportunity, lots of capacity for growth, room for new businesses, and that sort of things. Again, these districts have created this marketplace, and we have a tremendous opportunity here to strengthen them even further and to make this the #1 destination for the maritime on this East Coast. Critical to this and critical to maintaining that marketplace is keeping the working yards. I can't say it enough to you that slips alone are not the key to keeping this industry's future. You have to provide these other services. If a boat pulls in and can't get some of these other things done, then they're going to stop coming here. So we have to maintain those services as well. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that there's not uses that are competing in a way that'll drive out these critical services and those sorts of things. Big classic example is residential. It's very difficult for residents to live next to a noisy, sometimes smelly boatyard. So we have to make sure that those things are balanced well in order to keep this moving. Next slide, please. A little bit more about the industry and this opportunity here in Maryland. We have more marinas in the state of Maryland than you'll find from New Jersey to Maine. So if you think about that concentration of marinas that we have here, we have a tremendous, again, this gives us a great opportunity. And Anne Arundel County registers more boats than any other county in the state of Maryland. Statewide, we're a $3.5 billion industry with about 13,000 individuals employed. So with this opportunity of promoting Annapolis, and a lot of what Wendy said just rings so true with us as well, we have a tremendous opportunity to promote this area as the center for maritime, to get folks from all over the state as well as all over our neighboring states to use Annapolis as their destination for all of these maritime services. Next slide, please. So working together, and again, talking with a lot of different folks within the industry, the tenants, the folks that are paying the rents, the folks that are running these yards, the folks that are running these different businesses, working together, we came up with these agreements on what the contributing uses and triggers need to be. Number one, that the uses must continue to support the health of the maritime industry. So a dentist and a lawyer, they just don't support the industry. There are some other types of uses that we can be looking at to recruit and to bring in here. But we really need to make sure that in the end that they check that one box. Yes, they support the health of the maritime industry. As I mentioned previously, residential uses have to stay out of the maritime districts. Restaurants were identified as contributing as they contribute to a working yard, offering food and lunches and things for that. But in addition to that, our slip holders have become more demanding on what they get when they pull into their slip. Swimming pools and restaurants are more and more important to this transient boater as they're pulling in to rent slips in a boat yard. And in order to get those things, the best method is to look for triggers that allow that to happen. A certain amount of land space and working yard and boat storage gives you the opportunity to then have a restaurant that would service that. Travel lifts, making sure that there's still, the ability to pull a boat from the water and do the kinds of service is another trigger. And fuel, being able to get on the water fuel is another benefit. We talked about ways that restaurants could even explore other being able to contribute other supplies to the boater. So perhaps there's a small marketplace that also is included with a restaurant. So I think that's my last slide. Stephen.
Thank you. In order to raise the profile of the maritime industry in the city, there are a couple of things that we can do. We can create an attractive website. We can launch a social media campaign. But there's some other things that we probably need to start doing as well. We definitely need to start attending maritime conferences to try to recruit some maritime business to the city. If Annapolis were to create a maritime industry group, that would help with advocacy and programming efforts. And in fact, a regional Blue Technology Collaborative could really help to facilitate movement in that direction. And the blue technology sector is slated for growth. And essentially what we need to do is to create buzz about the city so that maritime businesses actually want to be here. They want to come to Annapolis. They're attracted to the city because they want to be a part of something special, or they want to be part of a special maritime community. So that's really the end game for us. And a little bit earlier in the presentation, there was some, when Eileen was talking, there were different maritime studies that were, I guess, kind of highlighted. And I'm just going to go through some of the information from those studies at a high level to show maritime's economic impact here in the city. In 1986, there were 200 maritime businesses with 1,500 employees here in the city. In the 2009 study, the maritime industry in the city was a $1 billion industry with 3,000 boat slips. In the 2013 study, it showed that Annapolis represents 15% of Maryland's maritime business and 24% of the boat building business across the state. In addition, there were 242 maritime businesses with over 2,800 employees. So many of those employees were part-time, but in 86, there were 1,500 employees. In 2013, there were 2,800. So that's a pretty significant increase. And in the 2019 city finance report, when running the numbers, it became clear that the maritime businesses here in the city provide $2.4 million in property tax revenue to the city's operating budget. Now that represents 2% of the city's total operating revenue, but that is a significant number. Thank you.
Stephen, thank you. Terrific. And Susan, thank you as well. The next two slides, we will go to Cardi Templeton. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm skipping ahead. Do we have Pete McDevitt on?
Yes, I'm here.
Pete, take it away.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Eileen was kind enough earlier today to ask me to fill in for Mike Tomasini and Vic Pasco in presenting the residents' expectations here as we go forward with the Maritime Task Force. I believe there's consensus among the residents and in maintaining this critical mass for the industry and working maritime activities. I mean, that's largely why we live here and want others to come to enjoy the area as well. We don't want to see, residents as a whole do not want to see a waterfront redeveloped, especially for the purposes of more residential or businesses, offices and stuff that don't support the maritime industry. In other words, perhaps things like doctors and dentist office, if you will. But no, there is consensus to support the industry wholeheartedly. In strengthening the maritime industries as we go forward, and again, allowing for those businesses that only support the maritime industry is an important part of that plan, but also maintaining significant triggers to keep the service and hard maritime uses. One way of doing that, of course, is updating the table of uses, which I've helped along with Terry Lomax and Will Scott in and borrowing ideas even from sister cities on what they look for in staying ahead with the maritime industries as things are changing. Clearly they're changing. I've seen them changing over the last 40 years since I was a student as a midshipman here in the early 80s until the last 10 years now that I've brought my sailboat here and have kept it on Back Creek and Spa Creek. So I've seen the changes as well. Going forward, as you've heard time and time again, we don't want more residential property being built. And we do want to increase access to the waterfront. Next slide, please. Restaurants. While we recognize tourism is an important part of this change in the maritime industry, restaurants allow for waterfront access for the general public. The yards are those places to provide that these days because so much of the waterfront really is taken up by private individuals at this point. We no longer have ferry terminals or other public venues where the public can go down and enjoy the waterfront. So specifically on Back Creek, you would think of the marinas there might be places that they could afford to have a restaurant to allow the maritime traffic and also the general public to enjoy the waterfront there. Parking is always the issue when you introduce new businesses. As a resident here, especially here over where I live on King George Street, parking is always on the forefront and trying to strike that balance there. In Eastport, I know it would be the same issue. If we're allowing restaurants in certain places, can they provide meaningful parking, or can we strike a balance with the residents to allow for the two to coexist? Would be something that would have to be approached. And again, having triggers in place so that both parties it's acceptable to both parties at hand. Next slide, please. Again, compatible uses. As we go forward and make these changes, are we recognizing sea level rise projections and the impact they're going to have on the waterfront as we're going forward here? So we just have to be mindful of that. And I know as a resident, again, something that's important to us. Expanding public water access, as it mentions here, better uses of the city-owned properties for things like that. The street end parks, can they, although they're small in size, but can they be developed to where allow a lot of new young people now, paddleboarding, kayaking, canoeing, things like that? Can they have access to the waterfront from what limited parcel of land there is there? Can we create a network to connect these streets and parks on Spa Creek, on Back Creek, perhaps through the use of water taxi services, much like if you look at Newport, Rhode Island, where they have an extensive water taxi service that has predestined stops throughout the hour. Could we move our general public to Back Creek and up and down Spog Creek to some of these different places, city parks that maybe you could have a concert or a food truck or something there to give these people a reason to go, and then rather than drive, they could enjoy the water via taxi. I believe that is it. Thank you very much.
Pete, thanks so much. And I want to add a comment that one of the advantages of looking at the maritime uses on waterfront property is that they are compatible with sea level rise. They are land intensive uses. They are not, buildings and structures for the most part. So with that, I'd like to turn it to Cardy Templeton and Will Scott. Cardy?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to let you know a little bit about what we've been working on. As some of you may know, my family has owned the property at 222 Severn Avenue for some 40 years now, where the Chart House restaurant is and Backyard Boats and the Pirate Adventure ship. If we could go to the next slide, please. I think it is worth taking a moment to realize the degree to which the industry has changed since the zoning was last looked at in '87. We are by and large a recreational boating industry now. And as Susan and others have said, that industry needs services in order to keep boats going, buy boats, sell boats, use boats, provision boats. The industry is also more of an occasional use. And as Scott Tinkler mentioned on one of these calls, a marina is no longer just the place where you go to hang your lines and you park your car and take your boat out for a week. A marina these days is a whole experience, right? It has the pool, it's got the playground. You might go to your boat to sit on it and enjoy the water and hear the birds. I know we have a number of slip tenants who are very concerned to make sure they can pull their boats bow in so that they can sit on the stern and have cocktails and watch the races. So as we think through water access, that's a lot of the reason a lot of us are here. I think we all want more and more of the people who live in Annapolis who don't live near the water to be able to access the water, and for visitors to be able to as well. When we think about access, we think not only of being on the water, as Wendy O'Sullivan was saying, whether we come by land to the water or by water to the land, but we also are thinking about experiencing the water by eating nearby, right? Eating at a restaurant, preferably even outdoors if we can, right? Maybe we're taking a yoga class right by the water. Maybe we are coming to work on the boat a bit while the rest of our family members or friends might check out the clubhouse at the marina. It is worth noting, as I talk about this wonderful potential boating experience that may not actually mean you are on the water, to say that particularly in WME and WMI, those marinas are at a significant competitive disadvantage as compared to properties outside of the city, because they can't at this point have restaurants that are of any substantial size or at all. And so I think that keeping our boatyards competitive so that people continue to want to come and bring their boats there and do bring their boats there, so that creates demand for the services. We've got to make sure we allow them to offer the full experience that boaters can get at other places. I won't spend too much time here on restaurants because I think Susan did a lovely job for us of talking about the ways in which they can support the experience of someone bringing a boat in, getting work done, getting provisioning done, being able to have a meal. And also they get the general public to a marina to have a boating experience, even if that person is not actually on the water. They are looking at boats, they're seeing boats, they're seeing the birds go by, they're watching people paddleboard, and that these days helps us develop boaters. Because boating is, as someone said, as much aspirational as it can be physically on the water, and it can be a lovely relief and balm just thinking about it. If I could have the next slide, please. I think we all absolutely want to support the industry and make sure that we're talking about uses that support the industry. If we're going to introduce a use of a restaurant, for example, in WMI or larger ones, WME, let's make sure that there's parking there. Let's make sure that the size of the restaurant is appropriate to the size of the marina, that it's not there to elbow out the services, but it is there as a complementary service to the other services that boaters and families of boaters are looking for when they come to see their boat. I will also speak a little bit to WMM, where our families had a marina for so long. We do not have the space for a big boatyard like a Jabin's, for example, but we do have the opportunity to provide access, right? That access can be walking along and having a picnic at the table. It could be potentially offering yoga classes by the water. It could be having a gazebo and being able to have an outdoor event. Again, not with the goal of that superseding other maritime services, but as a way to experience the water. We also in WMM and in all the boatyards and all the zones have an opportunity also to support inexpensive ways to get out of the water, paddleboarding, canoeing, kayaking, those sorts of things. Taking a trip on the schooner Woodwind. We've heard a lot about water taxis. I personally think that's one of the best ways to get out on the water in the city. So I think encouraging all the properties to provide more and more access, and access not just for people who have the means for a $5,000 weekend on a private boat, but people who are looking to spend $20 for an hour to get out and experience, to take their kids on a fishing charter trip and learn about bloodworms and spot and stripers. So as we think through, there are absolutely ways to make sure we incent the kind of access and use as we allow the properties as they need to have uses that are compatible with, and also help to underwrite the maritime.
Cordy, terrific. Will?
Well,
Next
isn't there one
slide.
more? Yeah, next slide. I think before I say anything else, I have to point out that when I got here in 1987, Eileen was already here. I'll just let that lie there. But the more important thing that I have to say to some of my fellow planning commissioners and all the new members of the commission is, I think all of these excellent presentations by members of the team show how thoughtful and serious and intelligent the members of the team are, how they come from many different perspectives to essentially the same consensus that the maritime uses and the water are part of Annapolis. It's part of the reason that the settlement was originally brought here from the other side of the Severn. It's part of what made this city wealthy in its golden age, and it continues to employ, as the economic stats show, so many Annapolitans and brings so many dollars to our local coffers and to our economy. So with that background and all of that hard work that so many people have put into it, I would just say as a participant that the degree of good faith and open exchange of ideas and the review of different perspectives and the needs of the industry and the needs of the residents and the needs of the general public have all been taken into effect, into consideration with the purpose of recommending a process, a path forward that will benefit the entire community, leaving no one out and seeing that everybody can progress into the future. So the last thing that I want to say to conclude before Eileen comes back for a few more remarks is, I think this group is ready to work on the hard lifting of crafting more precise language about what the triggers and incentives need to be. That's the real stumbling block. That's the big lift that remains. And I hope that all of you on the Planning Commission are going to look at what we've done, realizing all of the consensus and hard work and good faith that have gone into it, and then help us move forward to a conclusion for the benefit of our Annapolis community.
Will, I couldn't say it better. Let's go up 2 slides. The next slide after that. This, you get a little bit of an idea of all of the people who are in addition to the people you heard today. And I think Will said all of the big themes. And the bottom line is this task force, for its initial recommendations about strategy, is coalescing around the idea of strongly supporting and promoting the industry and creating a real one-stop shop for boat servicing for the Mid-Atlantic, and incentivizing, rewarding, in other words, water access or waterfront access, and looking at uses like you've heard described from each of these groups, venues, restaurants, outdoor uses that actually contribute to the health of the marinas. So with that said, why don't we, I see we have the mayor on. Mr. Mayor, your comments.
Eileen, I don't believe we do.
I see the mayor's face looking, oh, I see. I'm looking at an old slide of the mayor's face. I'm like, that's what you get. I'm
Very
like,
hopeful,
yes, you have the
very
mayor.
hopeful.
Okay, so with that, I'd like to turn it over to the Planning Commission. Your comments, your observations, your direction. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, this is Ben Sale here, Chairman. Thank you very much for all that hard work there. It's a lot of, clearly you've cast a very broad net and diversified net and brought in a lot of different aspects to the issue at hand. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to my fellow commissioners who first want to take a stab at it, and then I'll follow up after them. So who wants to go first?
This is Diane Butler. Oops.
Go ahead, Diane.
Oh, hi. Sorry, I wasn't sure I was unmuted. Great work. It's really interesting to hear this all coming together. Has anyone looked at the water access on Boucher and Jefferson on Wells Cove? It's an area that had historically water access, and the residents here had been working with the city to get a little floating dock for kayaks, for instance, and the city worked with us for, I guess, some of the residents over 10 years. And then a landowner recently put in a floating dock that blocked water access. And unfortunately, the city recommended approval. And now it's, in the hands of the port wardens. Has this task force looked at some of the areas in Eastport like that are right now on the chopping block that if we don't protect will go away within the next 6 months, 3 months? There's a couple of others as well.
Diane, they have. I'm going to let some combination of Wendy, Eric, and also your fellow planning commissioner, Mr. Waldman, who's on the water access group, respond to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, what I'll say is we haven't gotten down to the individual sort of parcel level, but we one of the things that was in the slides is this concept of making sure that in particular the city-owned properties are protected so that we are keeping open the water access opportunities that those properties can provide. So, part of the steps that we see happening is starting to drill down on the start of the catalog that we've begun. We just haven't gotten to that step yet.
So that's kind of a problem just because there's so few left. A lot of them are just going away right now. You know what I mean? It's not because once they're gone, they're really gone. So I was just curious, but okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Eric, did you want to add?
Yeah, I did want to kind of add to what Wendy just said that, there's clearly a number of existing, we're sort of starting with the existing sites, but then also the opportunity sites. And I mean, that's one of them. We're working on opportunities at Hawkins Cove. We're looking at things at College Creek. There's a number of sites that are on our radar, but we're also kind of starting with the ones that are in the maritime districts currently that we can kind of potentially add on to. And so it's all there. It kind of goes back to that the need for this sort of comprehensive catalog of waterfront access. That's the thing that
which we've had for a while, and a lot of the recommendations, especially out of Eastport and various places, has been to protect these places for water access. And despite many years of saying that, just we're totally letting them slip right now. And I'm just wondering if there's any thought about, rather than just putting this in the comprehensive plan and going forward, whether there's any action to be taken on what we have right now.
So Diane, the purpose of this, in addition to the comp plan, is obviously to have action strategy or actions that come out of it. And water access is going to be one of the areas where we're seeing very early agreement. There are some areas where you obviously have different perspectives, but Bob Waldman has done some work on liability insurance. Amy Clemens has done some work on how to get easements. So it's not just that these properties are being cataloged, but there'll be some very specific action items. And that, like I said, this is not a long-term study. We're going to be coming forward in May with all of that.
Great.
If I might add also, having sat in on the last couple of Maritime Advisory Board meetings, the city's harbor master presented at the last one, Diane, and she is actively working on 3 or 4 grants for studies to improve the existing street ends. And also there was a lot of talk about Hawkins Cove at the town hall that Ross Arnett held, which I think you were there, Diane. So I know.
And there was one last night as well. Yeah, great.
But I was really surprised at the number of locations that the harbor master was actively pursuing grants for studies and then installation, like enough that the idea was, let's get working on the ones we already got in the fire, because we probably have got more potential than we have manpower to deal with. So I thought that was positive.
I thought so too. And we were really excited when Beth was working with the community for the last 2 years to protect this one particular water access. And apparently while she's protecting it and saying, that we're working towards, keeping it, the Planning and Zoning Department, recommended that the application that was going to block this water access would be approved. So we're kind of working across purposes, and I'm hoping that there's some way we can stop that, because it's really unfortunate because now we have.
Well, fortunately, Diane, you're completely misinformed about that, but it's a much longer, more complicated story. And, I could go into it, except it's being heard before port wardens right now.
Yeah, true.
But
I might have the wrong fact, because I'm not allowed to actually be involved at all, and I haven't, so that's probably why
Right,
I'm
so I don't
behind
think
the.
you have the whole story, but, you know, we can talk about that another time. Actually, Eileen was planning director when that property was platted, and we have the public access because of her. Then I
Thank
asked
you,
her what
Eileen.
happened to the water access. What happened with that, Eileen?
This is Ben. Can I chime in real quick? Since we're talking about the Harbor Masters projects, can you say, are quite a few of those on the south side of Spa Creek, or where are they located that she's looking to do those? The preponderance of them is what I'm looking for. Where are they?
Can Eric or Sally, I know Mike Tomasini has the answer to that. Eric, can you answer that?
Ben, are you talking about what street end
Street end.
park opportunity? Yeah. I mean, I don't know that there's not a particular concentration in any one place. I'm
looking for stuff happening on the south side of Spot Creek, because that's where we're slightly lacking. I mean, I don't want to cast a negative. I mean, we have one of the greatest water accesses I've ever seen, and I've lived in a lot of places in the United States. But the south side of Spot Creek is seemingly where we're a little bit weak. So is some of the focus going there? Have you seen in those projects?
I can't remember. I have the list, but I don't know if Cardi, you remember off the top of your head.
I don't remember off the top of my head.
We
I'm
have
sorry.
that list. We will send that list to you.
I'd be interested to see that in a slide or something somewhere, because, okay, thanks.
We will gladly.
Back to you, Diane. I don't want to take your time.
No, I was just curious. It also sounds like I liked the idea. Several people mentioned that maybe sitting at restaurants is a way. I mean, I don't understand it, but it's like a passive way of enjoying the water that might turn into people that boat more. I guess that was Susan Zellers. Is there any relationship that says, or has anyone studied the issue of sitting and passively watching boaters at a restaurant as actually increasing our boating use or purchased, or I just don't see that link. I like it, but I just don't I don't know where that came from.
Susan, do you want to answer that, or should I?
That I know of, there's no official study, Diane, that says if you sit by the water for a long time, you're going to want to buy a boat. But, you know, for as long as man has been around, they've been trying to figure out how to float on the water. First it was rafts, then it was something else, and that sort of thing. So you've got to imagine there is a connection between the two. So, you know, whether there's anything official written, not that I know of. We do have some studies now about the paddle sports leading to boats with engines. So that gradual moving up, if you will, from stand-up paddleboards or kayaks to actually owning a boat with an engine or a larger boat, going from smaller to larger boats, but not that I know of from sitting in a restaurant on the water.
I think the issue is that we have heard from a lot of the marina owners is that it's a competitive issue. In other words, if there were no restaurants in marinas anywhere in the Chesapeake Bay, it wouldn't be as much of an issue. But people have a choice of going to Port Annapolis, or they can go into Anne Arundel County. And if they go just around that point into Anne Arundel County, they can go to Sam's Restaurant. It's a full service event. So it's an issue that when boaters come, if they're moving particularly up and down the East Coast, that's one of the services they want.
Right. And then I love the idea of keeping working boat yards, but are you saying that by having restaurants, we'll be sort of subsidizing boat yards to be able to keep those working boat yards?
Yes. Bob, why don't you answer that?
Marine, it's one of these slides said, it's not only slips, it's that marinas have become sort of recreational destination points in which, as somebody pointed out, you don't necessarily sail the boat. I mean, we're used to seeing millions of dollars of boats all tied up at slips on beautiful weekends, but that people come to the boats, there's a pool, there's a clubhouse, there are things to do. and they sort of spend a weekend there, or they whatever, or they even pull in from a trip up and down the coast, and they use those services. And that in order to keep the boatyard / marinas successful, that there need to be more of these kinds of other activities and attractions. It's not that it leads necessarily to new boat owners, it's that the existing boat owners continue to use the marinas in the Annapolis area. If you went down to Heritage
Right,
Harbor,
and that,
go on.
sorry. Oh, no, I was gonna say, I agree. I mean, part of that, I don't, you know, as a boater, an active boater, I agree with a lot of that. But, you know, one of the things we just tried was at Sarles and Petrini's to have an active boatyard. And what we ended up with, despite what was actually approved, is, you know, 11 luxury townhomes and a marina. I mean, maybe at some point it may be a working boatyard, but there seems to be no sign of it. And I think there, you know, seems to be signs that people want to revisit the restaurant, but I don't see how they would ever have an active, a real working boatyard if they, you know, for instance, try to, you know, make a restaurant there. So I think that in that case, instead of subsidizing the working boatyard, a restaurant would actually prohibit there being a boatyard, which is exactly what we don't want. So what do we do in a situation like that?
Well, I think that people, that's actually been one of the things that people have focused on in this, which is how do you make the how do you preserve the working aspect, the hard maritime aspect, if you also put in something like a restaurant or commissary. And I think in one of these slides, I think that some progress has been made towards that end, which is beginning to look at what percentage of acreage allocation, you know, how to clearly define what these things are and what they're allowed to do. It's not being disregarded. I think it's one of the crucial and most sensitive points about all of this. And as Will Scott said, this is the heavy lifting that's coming, which is how to do it and yet how to permit some of these, quote, softer maritime uses and yet absolutely maintain the working nature of these yards. And as Susan Zeller said, putting homes next to the smells and sounds of a working boatyard, those are incompatible. Well, how do you make a restaurant?
Right.
So all I can say is you've raised a point which has also been raised and recognized by lots of people on these committees. You're not wrong.
And Diane, I would add to what Bob has just said, that one of the uses that everyone is in agreement with that should not be in any of these working maritime districts is residential. And the idea of restaurants is tied to the larger sites where, and again, the types of standards and everything that has been brought forward is that the restaurant accommodate the boatyard, not the other way around. So when you're looking at Back Creek, these 20-acre or 18-acre sites that you have back there, that those sites, and they're not talking about large restaurants, that those sites could easily accommodate both the parking and the restaurant and have it in no way interfere with, have it contribute to their working yard. If you've got a smaller site, that may not be the case. And I think that's what, as we look at the standards, that's what will be evaluated.
And then my final question is, if you're going to change the use tables at all, none of this will be retroactive to any of the existing sites that have applications in or have just been approved for certain things? Or is that not being discussed?
Well, if something's been approved, I'll let Sally answer this. If something's been approved, obviously it's not retroactive. One of the things, there are different ways to deal with the change of uses. One can be that it doesn't impact existing applications. I have also seen it done in situations where there can be timing that ties it to requiring a building permit or something like that. So it can be handled in different ways depending on what direction the city wants to go. Sally?
Yeah, that's that's what I would say. It depends on exactly how the legislation is crafted. You aren't vested until you have your building permit. So it depends on when the legislation comes out and how exactly council writes it.
Okay. Got it.
Are you concerned about the South Annapolis Yacht Center somehow getting more flexibility than they've already acquired?
Well, right, because the current situation is, and these facts are not disputed, because the Planning Commission approved with water access as a condition, and there's a fence up that doesn't allow access currently. And so, it seems like, and the other part is there's building F is a maritime use only building because it's in the WME. And it was supposed to be for metal manufacturing or fabrication originally. And it's a large building and it's been constructed to look like garages. And when, residents said, hey, these look like garages, it's not on the maritime use table, it's a residential use, it doesn't fit here. They said, no, it's not, they're not going to be garages, not going to be garages. Well, go over there and take a little look. You'll see it looks suspiciously like 8 garages. And in fact, the developer there has been marketing those, the manufacturing, the WME building, which is, the use is maritime only, as garages that you can lease. So I just, I would hate to see us just given, they're not following the law as it is, and the city's not quite enforcing it right now for whatever reason. So I can't imagine us like saying, okay, well, we gave you residential and, I don't know. It just seems like we're not doing a good job at upholding what we said we were going to do as a city and the Planning Commission and, through the surveys we've done here in Eastport. And I'm just raising it as a concern.
Well, I don't think we ought to replay the history of the South Annapolis Yacht Center, but remember, it did not come in front of the Planning Commission as an application, so we weren't able to write any conditions. It only came as a plat approval, and you and I have discussed that. And it may be that as a result of various incentives here, that we may be able to get, in fact, public access, in which case the guy will be able to sell his, quote, fabrication shops as parking garages for cars. But we would get public access if that's the way he decides to go. Otherwise, it becomes an enforcement fight. And okay.
No, well, and we do actually. It's definitely an issue to be pursued. But right, we're talking about a larger issue here, so probably going into the details isn't the right time or place. But
yes.
But thanks for the clarification on everything, Eileen and Susan and Cardi. Appreciate it.
I have a,
go
ahead, Bob, you were talking. I'll go after you.
No, go on.
So this probably comes as no surprise for people that know me, but the issue of parking, I think, is something that we're going to all have to think about carefully, because I think the conventional wisdom about parking is just not really right, in the sense that it mandating parking and to fit the size of a restaurant and that kind of stuff, I think often has perverse incentives. And so I would try to get people to think differently about what sort of parking regulations that we have. And so thinking about the restaurant idea at a marina, if you mandate a lot of parking, you're going to get people who, if it's a good restaurant, people will go there just for the restaurant, and if it's easy to go and park. And that's sort of the perverse incentive that it creates, versus creating a restaurant that's going to be used primarily by people who are already going to be at the marina or passing through or whatever. So I think that's one of those things where an example, if you want to keep a restaurant from getting too big, in the sense of too much demand. For example, you could mandate no parking, no extra parking for a restaurant, and that if there's already parking at a marina or whatever, people who use those spots, to be on part of their boats might still use them to go to the restaurant while they're doing stuff with their boats, but it doesn't encourage other people to go, just as if it were a restaurant on Main Street. And so, I think you have to be careful about applying these sort of blanket, frankly, junk science rules around minimum parking for a number of seats in a restaurant, because they do, it does create incentives that may go against your other goals, like keeping a restaurant right size for the use in a marina by the people who are somehow peripherally associated with the marina. So, and I think, in smaller places like on the Eastport Peninsula, there are a lot of restaurants around within walking distance. So certainly in some districts, I think that restaurants probably shouldn't be allowed because, within a 5 or 10 minute walk, you're probably at, have access to 10 different restaurants. So needing one, on-prem, to me is kind of like a downtown trying to compete with a suburban mall. I get it if you're a Harrington Harbor North, and there's nothing within miles around, you really have to have a restaurant there, because otherwise you have to get in your car and drive 20 minutes to go get something to eat. But in places around much of the maritime districts, maybe where Jabins is an exception, because that is a little bit farther away with larger lots. But the other ones, I think there's enough restaurants around that it just seems like you're trying to compete with something that you're not. So those are just sort of 2 words of caution, I think, and things that have to be thought about as we start thinking about legislation.
Alex, I think 2 good comments. First of all, I agree that everywhere we tend to apply suburban standards where they are not necessarily needed for parking. I'm in strong agreement with your observation on that. The area where the biggest need for the restaurants came was from Bemby Beach, where they're competing immediately with the county, and they don't have restaurants there. That, I think, was where the strongest argument came.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I certainly see that.
Right. I don't think that in the WMM and WME, I don't think that there's as much demand. Cardi Templeton could probably speak to this better, but I don't think that there's as much demand on the Eastport Peninsula. Also, with respect to parking, one of the things that is recommended is that in circumstances where people, landowners have parking which is used during the day but not at the night and the weekends, is that we much more liberally pursue and incentivize actually shared parking, so that people who go to the boatyard and in Eastport can park at the city marina, and the city marina can get some sort of incentive for permitting that kind of getting into agreements with the various restaurant owners around, and the parking is therefore used more than just during the weekday times, and it takes pressure off the streets. And I think that kind of an analogous thought process might go into something over on the WMI side with the larger acreages, where there might be parking permitted in boatyard spaces that are not used during nights and weekends, for instance. I don't know. I haven't really thought about that one too much. But with respect to the city marina, there's, I don't know, several hundred spaces there which can be used as shared parking to the benefit of everybody, including that landowner.
Yeah, I agree with that, and especially insofar as these are their own zoning districts. So you could be more creative about that kind of stuff without worrying about it spilling over into
yes,
King George
yes. Yes, if, for instance, parking requirements for these things were written, tailored to each of the three relevant districts, I think that, yes, we could move forward with win-win situations for everybody. I think it could be helpful. There's a couple of things I usually bring up problems and not necessarily solutions, or I throw out solutions which may become problems. But I notice a couple of things. One of them is that the argument for restaurants comes from two different directions. One of them is that it's for the water-based customer. We have to make our marina more attractive. And the other argument comes from it's an attraction for the land-based customer. And in which case the landowner is going to want some sort of percentage trigger for public access. Well, that public access is really only being used by that land traveling customer and not by the water traveling customer. So I don't know if that's a wrinkle that needs to be looked at, or because I would hate to see them get sort of double benefits from something which they're really not benefiting all the way around. In other words, they're maybe getting benefits for people who would use it anyway, and it's not actually increasing real public access. Another idea that I had was that people have said, well, you know, I've heard this complaint for years. We don't really have a place where boaters can come and provision. And that the notion has come up that, well, maybe these, quote, restaurants, could sell supplies. Well, perhaps what we might work into our definitions is that if a proportion of that building is used as a commissary, and a commissary is defined as providing marine resources and provisions, that it gives them a better bump, or that it has to be a certain percentage of the floor space or whatever. I think that we should really consider incentivizing that rather than granting permissions to banquet halls and event halls. We really want to see this is I think relevant maybe in WME and WMI, but instead of just calling it a restaurant, but if we can give more of an incentive, if a significant percentage of the floor space is used as commissary, we pursue our goals a little more directly. So that's an idea that Will Scott will have to figure out and what to do.
And Susan Zeller's group, the Marine Trades Group, also talked about as a very similar recommendation that restaurants should be tied to commissaries. So that's in there, and that's one of the things we have to flesh out the details.
I totally agree. You can accuse me of theft of a good idea. Thanks, Ms. Zellers. A third point is, everybody, you said several times, we don't want doctors, dentists, and lawyers. I don't know what you meant by that, but I think that there may be some office buildings which perhaps are amenable to doctors, dentists, and lawyers. And I don't understand what the objection is to allowing those kinds of activities in an existing office building. Now, I can understand the hesitation to allow a new office building built for dentists, doctors, and lawyers, but what about in existing office buildings that may, be having problems renting space while we maintain that percentage of required maritime use office space?
Yeah, and Bob, this has been, I'm going to dogpile on that one real quick. Like Horn Point Harbor used to do a lot of boating out of there last year, and they have a lot of extra offices that they rent out, and some of them are to people who are not even doctors and lawyers and all that, but there is a lawyer or two in there. And so I would believe that helps actually keep the resiliency of that property staying a marina, because they can rent out that building and get some more income. So I'm with Bob on this one, and there's other places out there. So what's the response to that?
Eileen, isn't the recommendation to maintain a significant percentage of these office buildings for specifically maritime businesses?
So Bob, you're getting into something where we're not quite at yet. Right now, under the maritime zone in WMM, there can be 30% non-maritime, and 30% non-maritime certainly includes, whatever non-maritime is. I don't think there has been any discussion to say the non-maritime uses can't be doctors and lawyers. I think the thrust of it is that for uses that are considered contributing or complementary, that there is not a desire to see new office buildings and that kind of thing.
Right. Okay. So it would be existing office buildings, Ben. Nothing new, and a percentage would have to be maintained.
That hasn't been, Bob. You're getting into an area where there is not consensus on that.
Sorry. See what I told you I would be creating conflict.
I know, exactly.
They'll look into it though. That's
Yes.
I'm happy with that. It's being looked at. So good.
Yes, that's the next group of issues that we will be looking at. Again, one of the things we've worked hard to do is find areas where there's agreement now. And then after we get from these areas, then we get to the next level of areas. And Bob is raising all very good points, which have very differing perspectives.
All right, I'm admonished. Then I will move on really to my last point, which is really tangential, but it has to do with marketing and maintaining our status as a maritime service center. And that is in talking around to various tradespeople as I refurbish an old beat up piece of fiberglass. These guys say that there's not enough young people who are learning these trades. And they all say that there really should be, as part of there should be vocational education in the maritime trades. I mean, there's a lot of work around, and it's hard to find people who know what they're doing. And I'm not sure that where that fits into this. It's a real soft kind of a goal, but it's one that I think really makes sense. And I'm thoroughly disappointed in the public school system, which only seems to support STEM vocational schools and not much more in the kinds of work that other kids, not college-bound kids, can do. But providing the minor leagues, of tradespeople, training people to learn how to do, fiberglass and rigging and all of the things that go into boat servicing is part of what has to maintain. Is necessary part to maintain our reputation as a service center along the East Coast. And I think that it might just be, in the nature of a recommendation that's part of the report. And with that, I will conclude.
Susan, do you want to respond to Bob's comment?
I most certainly do. So Marine Trades Association has a very robust workforce development program where we recruit young people, 18 to 24-year-olds, and put them in 6-week on-the-job training practicums. We're retaining 65% of those kids in those jobs. We have several partners here in Annapolis who have taken our kids and moved them up through the rankings. We're in our 5th year. We're about to go for our 5th grant cycle we get our grant from the state of Maryland EARN program. And I encourage you to go to our website. I'd be happy to talk with you more about it. It's an absolutely fantastic program. We're very close to a full-blown apprenticeship in Maryland. Unfortunately, it's not going to be at Anne Arundel Community College just yet. We've got one potentially going in to Cecil Community College and one over at Chesapeake Community College. True apprenticeships take 144 hours of classroom time in addition to being mentored within a business. And ABYC, which happens to be American Boat and Yacht Council, which happens to be located in Eastport, has written a curriculum and helped us to pace it to 144 hours. So before long, within the next couple of years, we'll have a full-blown apprenticeship here in the state of Maryland for these folks that you're talking about. So
Wow.
happy to talk more about it. We've got a great program.
Fantastic. I'm going to thank you. I'll take a look at it and pass it along. I think it's fantastic. I had no idea you were doing this.
So, and I have to do a plug here. If any of you know anybody between the ages of 18 and 24 who don't know yet what they're doing with their lives, please send them to our website and we would be happy to put them into jobs, paying jobs. Right away.
Susan, I would love to connect with you on the program.
Okay. Love to.
And yes, this should absolutely be part of the task force's recommendation to continue to support and do even more of this, because it's also a series of opportunities for jobs, right? Which is one of the real values of the maritime industry to our town.
Yes, good.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you, Bob, and I'll go piggyback right off of you on that one, if that's okay with the rest of the commissioners. Okay, it's Ben Sale here. I will. I attended the Education Commission quite a few meetings, and one of them we went down to Central Middle School and then high school area, and they have the VOTEC school down there where they teach engine maintenance and some other things to high school age kids. So it sounds like your program starts at 18, where theirs goes beneath 18. As far as focusing specific on maritime industry, I don't think that exists, but they do touch on things that would go into the maritime industry. So maybe bridging that gap with the Education Commission and that VOTEC type school down there, but just a thing. All right, back to my original points here. It'll be 2 minutes or less. Thank you for the succinct brief. If I just walked away without asking any more questions, I would definitely remember the two major points of you want to have use changes to support resiliency, the modern needs, and protect the reason we have these zones. And then number two of these two biggest items I remember is improved water access. So I get it. And that's definitely things we can do in the comp plan and things we should do. Now for the questions that I have. You said for financial, it was 2% of total revenue. Was that revenue for the city that the maritime districts produce? Could you restate that point, the 2% of? I wasn't clear on what that exactly was because we breezed past it.
Stephen said, do we still have Stephen? I think he said it was 2% of our budget, 2% of
the operating budget.
Operating budget.
Yes, I'm still here.
$2.4 million property tax, 2% of the operating budget.
That's correct.
So 2% of the city's operating budget goes towards the maritime industry zoning districts in some way, shape, or form. Is that what that is?
No, comes from.
Comes from.
It's income to the operating budget.
So, I mean, if you take a look from Google Earth at our city and you said, oh, well, 2% comes from that. It just seems like that's it. But okay, that's what it is. That's just, I was curious what that is. Going to the change to prove uses, we already talked about doctors, lawyers, and need to allow restaurants and pools for customer capture. Allowing restaurants, I get the pools. We already have some places that have pools in Annapolis, and I know you're focusing more on the Bimby Beach, which I would agree with. But if I wanted to talk about more on the Spa Creek area, I mean, if people are coming to Annapolis, in my opinion, voters that I've been around, most of them are not coming to Annapolis to go for a water party, and they're more looking for the downtown aspect. But so now I understand that you're really focusing on Bimby Beach, which is basically almost out in the county. Got it. The public water access. We've done a wonderful job in this city over the years. I know recently there's been some angst and people saying the city's not doing a great job. There's no water access on the south side of Spot Creek. I've been running around in the water in the city for 20 years, and I'm in awe of how much this city has done versus all of the other cities I've lived in. So kudos to the people in the past who've worked on the way the city has water access, the things we have. Sure, there's places we can get better. I get it. And there's a lot of places that are opportunities. So we'll go for that. So wonderful. And I'm glad you guys are looking at that with the harbor master as well. The one thing I didn't get a big feel for in this brief, and kind of out of the planning and zoning department, planning commission's area of scope, is the loss of our open water space, and also the environmental impact. Are we getting better or not? So we're talking about keeping maritime industry. We're talking about keeping yacht yards that are doing a lot of boat painting. I mean, I've sanded and painted the bottom of boats, changed out bearings, you name it. I really wonder what's the environmental impact of that versus doing other things here. And we've gotten way better with taking care of the environment in these boat yards. I know a lot of things they have to do, but I'd really like to see what the environmental impact is of the current zoning versus more of the residential areas, and which is worse. It might even be that the residential areas are actually worse. And the loss of open water space, we've recently lost a sizable chunk of the open water space we use to sail. Kids with the dinghies sailing the lasers and what have you, 420s on Spot Creek, with docks that are going further and further out into the creek. I know that helps the resiliency of the property and the marina districts and helps them keep their businesses there with improved revenue. But at the same token, it's a loss of sailing grounds and, almost turning our creeks, actually almost, we've already done it, it's turned our creeks into parking lots versus open water recreational space. So I'd like to look at that and how we're going to address that in the future with keeping the open water space that we have. But that's all the points I wanted to make out. Everything else, you've pretty much given me my answers. So environmental impact and open water space. What do you guys think?
Ben, if I could just have Susan respond quickly on the environmental impact, because there's a huge amount of investment that's gone into these yards. I don't know if Susan or Cardi would be better, but I know Susan knows the answer on the environmental impact and what is being spent to address that.
The perspective that I have are the numbers of things that we've worked on that have come down from the Maryland Department of Environment, from the EPA, things like full general discharge permits for any discharge into Maryland waters that didn't used to be focused on just marinas, but were just industrial permits. They now are focused specifically on marinas. So we have a whole set of criteria that marinas have to reach in copper, lead, zinc, just total suspended solids. They have to be measured on a regular basis. And in most cases, all marinas are now capturing all of that water and recycling it and reusing it and recycling and reusing it. So none of it is being discharged into our water. So we have that. We also have volatile organic chemical specifications. So every time we open up a can of paint in a boat yard, you have to measure how much the chemical is in there, and then work towards a particular amount of what's getting released. That has to be recorded. And after you get to a certain point, you can only open certain kinds of paint. So they're all dealing with that for the air quality. They're also dealing with stormwater pollution prevention plans, which are required now for marinas and boat yards to have a plan for how that rainwater is going to run off your property, where it's going to go before it hits the water. So they're dealing with a lot of different aspects of the environment and continuing to, and that's also some of the expense that goes up for operating marinas and boat yards.
Okay, thank you. So we're clearly getting better. More rules are being passed, but as Diane alluded to, the enforcement of those rules and what's reality, as the water quality is actually getting better. We've gotten reports on that for Spot Creek and the Severn. So we know that's happening. So that's good. We want to keep our maritime businesses as long as those better intentive rules are being passed and followed. I'm all for it. Is there any evidence to show that residential areas are actually more pollutive than the existing maritime use areas that we currently have? I.e., people putting, a lot of fertilizer, washing cars, things like that, or is that just not the case?
I don't know the answer to that.
I would think you wouldn't have any data on that at the moment. That's kind of a broad question.
I don't have any data.
Okay, we'll take it as that. Well, that's all I have for you guys. Thank you for the work. That was extraordinary that you put together that much work such a short period. But we do have other commissioners that might not have talked. David or anyone else, anything to add?
I just want to add that the no discharge zone application looks like it's finally moving. It's in Philadelphia, and with the change of administration, it looks like it's probably going to be approved probably, sometime in 2021, maybe second quarter. So that's also good news for the environment. Thank you.
And one other thing to add is I've had a few friends that are cruisers from Florida and also up in Maine come to Annapolis and then be told to leave because they had composting toilets, which is the new environmental thing that's sold, and Annapolis doesn't accommodate that. Many marinas around us, and even on the Chesapeake Bay, accommodate servicing those, Vice doing pump outs. But so they actually left. They left docking downtown to go elsewhere across the bay, where they actually accommodated composting toilet type law wise. So I know it sounds odd, but I actually know people that didn't stay because of that and were actually told to leave Annapolis. And these aren't just regular people. This is a lawyer and her husband who was a doctor. So and more than one. They had a bunch of friends with them as well. So just something to look into is how do we handle that with the marinas if that comes across in your conversations. And that's all I have.
Hey, Ben, I would like to point out that doctors and lawyers are regular people.
Yeah, I know. That's what
Just
I'm
an
trying to point here, is
observation.
we're trying to go after them.
And I need to add
Really?
that a good friend of mine that I play tennis with, Mike Matan, just lost his thumb because he was he got some water from a creek where he was fishing right around here in Annapolis. Some water got into where I guess when he was pulling the hook out of the fish's mouth, and somehow the gill cut his thumb. He ended up with Vibrio, and they luckily within hours of him getting it were able to amputate his thumb. And he won't play tennis again with his right hand, but they were able to to save his arm that way. But so our creeks and Vibrio are real things, and so pollution is still an issue. So we're very happy to have the no discharge zone. I agree that composting heads are an issue, and I'm sure Susan could give you a lot of statistics on what that means to our maritime business and what's changing there. But I do think we're moving in the right direction environmentally.
Ben, I did take your question down about the, comparing the discharge sources. I'm curious about, I think Jackie Guile might have some information on that. So I'll see if I can get any, it may have been covered in our watershed plan.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else from the commissioners? Anything to say?
I'm just saying I'm pretty impressed. I'm definitely a water person, but not a motorized person. I'm the stand-up paddleboarder that may go on. So I'm really interested in the access that you guys are talking about, as well as I'm happy to hear about these programs to help people get into the industry. And thank you for sharing. There's been a very educational session, and I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to hearing more.
Thank you.
All right.
Ditto. That was wonderful. I appreciate all the effort. It seems like you've done a lot of work. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So what can we expect next in the timeline from your task force for the Planning Commission? Or what do you need from us?
We should be coming back to you in April with another work session. And hopefully at that time, we will have flushed out the details and the standards on restaurants. We'll be talking about what amounts of non-maritime uses go in, should support the different districts. So we'll be down in the weeds a little bit more.
Okay, thank you. We'll be looking forward to it. If you need anything from us, please let us know. And I'm sure Bob will too, because he's an integral part of it.
Great. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you. Good night, you guys. Sally, on to you guys to adding anything with respects to the comp plan in regards to that, or?
Yes, so I just want to thank Eileen for all of her hard work on this. And next, Eric has a presentation. Are you presenting it, Eric, or is Julian?
Yeah, I have it here. What's how late are we going?
I'm sorry?
How late are we going on this meeting? The presentation's brief. I just don't know what your typical protocol is on.
If you're looking to forego that presentation so we can go ahead and get to the public hearing, we could do that, and because that would help us save time. We could punt it, but do we not want to do that?
I could go first. Mine's the easiest ordinance you've ever seen in your life.
Go ahead. Let's make it happen then. Go for it.
Okay. So let get ready. Okay, so this is ordinance 04720. And I emailed you map of the proposed zoning and a map of the existing zoning.
And you
I
want to
asked-
share that?
Yeah, I asked Julian to show the proposed zoning. So you can see that the parcel in yellow in 2016, when we digitized our zoning maps, we accidentally included that into the C2A, that wine colored zoning district. So this ordinance will fix that error that we recently discovered just by looking through the files and turning it back into C1, which is what it was always intended to be. So the C1 district is conservation residence, and the C2A is special conservation business. So there are a little bit of differences between the two. And I think it was just accidentally included because of where that street is, and we just drew the line too big. So that is it in a nutshell. Are there any questions for me?
So
I'm just
Sally,
curious,
does this have to,
is there any controversy over this? Is the owner happy with that, or do they even know?
Well, I sent a letter to the owner in Colorado, and I haven't heard anything. So that's the only way I have to be in touch with the owner.
this is Diane, I almost feel like I would want to get some affirmative comment from the owner that it isn't a problem, if that's possible. I mean, other than a letter, I don't know, maybe a couple of certified letters attempted first, just out of an abundance of
Do a
caution.
certified letter.
To be clear, Sally, the changing, you're talking about just an error we had when we changed to GIS mapping types or something, or so it never really was, or just
Right, when we digitized our maps. So
recently under the
in
previous director.
2016.
Right.
It's possible they don't even know the zoning change. So
What does it say on paper in legal terms for that property and on the
legally,
deed and everything else?
well, the zoning's not on the deed, but legally now this property is C2A.
So what is it? What's the current use conforming to, C1 or C2A?
C1. It is a residence.
Okay, so if it were, I mean, to make it C2A, it would end up being non-conforming.
If it were a business, then we wouldn't want to change it to C1. But since it's
Let's put it this way, to have even changed it with the map change, wouldn't you have had to notify the owner then? And it never happened, so it's never legally changed?
We should have, yes. And so I assume we probably did not, because we did not think we were changing it.
So it was not legally changed in the first place.
I'm not sure to what extent you need the property owner's permission to change the zoning, but you would need, in 2016, we still would have needed some justification to change it, which we didn't present. We were very careful to document all of our changes that were usually just cleaning things up, places where the line that had been drawn on paper, we had to change it a little bit to match when we digitized the maps. So we were very careful to document all of those and to notify all the property owners. So yes.
And the line drawn on paper shows it as not what it is now, right?
Well, our old maps, our old paper maps show it as C1, but then our digital maps now show it as C2A. But I suspect, actually, I know that property owner was never notified of the change at that time.
Yeah, I find it interesting that you need legislation to change something back to something that was never changed in the first place. Just seems to me that you can't just do this administratively and be done with it.
Right. I
You're reading my mind.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this seems like a way heavy process where changing it back administratively is no harm, no foul. I mean, it's one thing if, you know, if the property owner ran into a snag because they were trying to do something, they had a, you know, they put in some sort of an application, they got all balled up because it was a mistake. And, you know, but no harm, no foul. Change it back administratively and be done with it. As long as you can document.
I just
Has that
don't have-
property changed? Has that property changed hands and ownership since 2016?
No.
Okay.
It's
and
just not
but
an
yet we-
administrative power that the planning and zoning director has.
To fix mistakes? Really? I mean,
Well,
you're not changing it.
When we passed this in 2016, we did add into it that we could fix mistakes as long as less than 10% of the property was affected. But, you know, this one, it's all of the property that was affected. So we can administratively fix small mistakes. But we had to add that language specifically in 2016. So.
Oh, well, seems like a no-brainer. And I'm already into discussion here, but how much time do we have to spend on this?
Well, as long as I say we just go ahead and get it through with the notation that it was an administrative error displayed in GIS. We're correcting the GIS. We're not actually changing approved zoning. It was never approved. So if that, as long as that's in the write-up that it was never approved, and we're changing it back, we're changing the pictorial. You know what I mean? You get my gist? Then I'm
I got
fine with it.
Okay.
All right. So with that, we have a motion for approval with any other discussion? We're already in discussion.
Well, did you open a public hearing on that, or?
I mean,
We did not receive any public comments on. So you are making a recommendation to city council for this ordinance.
yes.
Sally, do they need to hold the public open until the 17th? Is that,
I
since it's
think
a
that's
public
what I
hearing?
was getting at. That's what it said in the agenda, that it was going
Oh,
to be
yes.
open for next week or next time.
Right. COVID.
Yeah. So it has to stay open. You
Right. So
can't
we need to
approve
hold it up until the next meeting.
Don't we need
Okay.
to open the public hearing? Open a
Yeah,
public,
did you actually open the public hearing?
no.
Okay.
Yeah, this just,
I don't
I
think
mean,
you have
I'm
to
with
open
Alex.
it
This totally seems odd that we're gonna have a public hearing on an item that's just a map error, but yet the property has been advertised with that zoning for the last 3 years plus. So, boy. Honestly, I'm leaning towards just a strike in the need for a recommended legislation change and then have it be just a map correction. Because they really don't have that zoning, in my view of what I'm hearing here. So I don't think this is necessary from what I'm hearing, and that we just make the map correction. Because if we recommend the city council to pass legislation to change zoning to something that truly doesn't exist, it's just a pictorial error on a computer map. You get what I'm saying? I know, Alex, you do.
Well, it
I
is.
do, but
physical
Sally made a good, made a good case for not having that authority. So maybe our attorney should have been here to weigh in on
But I
this
mean,
one.
so Sally, tomorrow, if you go print out a map, you go have somebody make a zoning map and then they post it. And they make an error. Are we instantaneously up? We can't change it back now because we just posted it online. Therefore, we've approved it by
Well,
making an error.
the problem is this is on the map that the city council approved and adopted, and the mayor, signed. This is the official map of the city.
Well, and that map that's approved has underlying text legislation that's with it, but the text legislation, does it go into as much detail as to say street by street, address by address, line by line?
No,
No, no.
If
The
it
map-
doesn't, then in essence, it was approved and it is changed.
it is. I mean, it was incorrectly changed, but it is now legally C2A.
Yes. Okay, yeah, all right, you've walked me to it. Thank you. So yes, we would have to, all right.
Yeah.
Now I'm with you. Thank you for walking me out of the shadow. Okay, I'm with you. Well, I think we should move forward with it then. And the public hearing will be held open till February 18th for it.
Okay,
Any other
thank you.
comments from the commissioners?
Just to be formal, now that the public hearing is open, I move that we incorporate the comments that were made just a moment ago by Dr. Nash and the map that was displayed as evidence. And therefore, we don't need to repeat it for the record. I would also suggest that you send another certified letter. Just
Good idea.
And then in 2 weeks, if we've not received a response, we can continue moving forward. Is that
And do
okay?
property owners register emails now for communications as well, or doesn't happen?
You say that again, Ben?
Do property owners have a way of registering their email for communications as well as paper? Owners of property?
Not that I know of. I mean, we have some emails if they've applied for a permit recently, but if they haven't applied for a permit, planning and zoning wouldn't necessarily have it.
Yeah, you would think if there's a property and it's owned by someone, where would that be listed? You know, where so planning and zoning could email them as well as paper copy. But that's out of this realm. Never mind. That'll just belabor our conversation.
There's a motion. I made the motion to incorporate the discussion by Dr. Nash and the map.
And I'll second that motion. So there's a second. All those in favor say, all right, just any further discussion after the second?
Can you repeat what Dr. Nash said? I missed it, obviously. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Dr. Nash.
Which part, Bob, were you specifically referring to?
That's why I wasn't clear.
Yeah, you described that prior to 2016, that this property was in C1. Correct? And that when the 2016 GIS changes were made, it was mistakenly left out of C1, correct?
Yes.
And there's been no change in property. There's no application to take advantage of a C2A designation. And that this is simply a mistake that was made and needs to be corrected.
Yes.
Mr. Waldman, isn't that in her discussion so that we would put in there? And so I'm confused as to why you're motioning.
Well, just because she said it before we formally opened a public hearing, that's all. I'm just being scrupulous. I'm just repeating what was said before to make sure that it's included in our discussion in case anybody ever listens to this.
Okay.
Is that it? Am I making trouble? Am I making trouble again, or am I trying to move things forward?
No, that's moving things forward. That's correct, because we weren't flowing it properly. It was kind of haphazard
Okay,
on my part.
thank you. I've already been admonished once tonight.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second.
Who seconded? I'm sorry, I missed a second. Was it Mr. Pline?
I can
Yes.
second it.
Okay, thanks.
So Tammy, are you clear? Can you repeat what you have?
Yes, I got Mr. Waldman's comments. He moved, and then I got Mr. Pline as the second. So I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. And for the vote, no more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition
Aye.
or abstentions? Unanimous. Okay,
So
that
we'll
takes
take-
care of,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We'll take final action on this next meeting. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
because your motion was just carrying that information in, so.
Okay.
So the public hearing stays held open. There'll be another letter sent to the owner. And we'll continue that. All right, now we're done with public hearings items. Miscellaneous has been punted till the next meeting. That's all we have on the agenda today, except for reminder of 10 o'clock Monday morning training for commissions, if anyone can make it. That email has been sent out to all the commissions by Hillary Raftovich, I believe, or another person from the mayor's office. And then also there is a dual meeting that wants to be had for ourselves as well. Sally, do you still have any details on that? Is that still going to happen for the dual meeting?
Yes, thank you. So February 25th, I will send out a more formal email, but please mark your calendars for a joint HPC Planning Commission meeting. And it's going to be a presentation about from the AMRP group, which is the group of several different companies that are managing the Hillman Garage redo and the parking at City Dock, or in the whole City Dock redo, based on the City Dock Action Committee. So that they want to make sure that they have your input and that you know what's going on.
And is that at 7 p.m. at night?
7 p.m. Yeah.
It'll make it so you have continual meetings for the planning commission for 3 weeks in a row.
Ben was really excited to hear about this.
Extreme pain. And I'm like, it's just getting to be a bit much, but yeah.
I'm sorry. We will try to reduce your burden in the future, but
we won't be considered as a quorum for that meeting. It's still their meeting, but you say joint, it's like, well, are we going to have quorum for that if we don't all show in our quorum force, or no? I'd say we
not
keep
for a
it down.
presentation. Yeah.
Yeah,
not for a
just presentation. So if you can't make it, you can't make it, and you can always watch it later.
But if you could let me know if you can't come, that would be good.
Yeah. And
I live for these Thursdays.
I'm sorry?
I live for these Thursdays.
Good.
Is there, what do we have on, if you know, for the 18th? Or what is it, 4 plus 4, for the 18th? Do we have
You
anything
have-
else? What do we have?
Yes, you have the Public Works garage on Hudson.
Okay.
And I'm not
All right.
sure if you have anything else. I can check real quick. But I know Eric did prepare a very beautiful and brief presentation. I don't know if Ben, you have any more patience for him to just briefly go through it, but
he can briefly go through it, but I mean, I really have to bolt. I've got about 10 minutes before I need to be somewhere. So if you don't mind, guys, I need to bolt from this and pass it on to Bob. And I'll watch the YouTube on it later. Can I do that, guys? I know I can, but I'm just being nice. All right, I'm going to do that. So thank you, everyone. And Bob, I'm going to hand it over to you as I depart the pattern.
Good night.
All right, thank you, guys.
Okay.
You got it, Bob.
Night, Ben.
So-
All right. So Eric, how do you want to do your presentation?
Let me share my screen here. Okay. Let's see, you can all see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm not going to go through, and I did update this schedule. I know this was a hot topic last time, rightly so. The main thing that has changed is that we've pushed by a couple months. I added these regular check-ins with Planning Commission and City Council. I think the $1 million question is when this thing is makes sense to go into kind of an adoption process for through city council. And that's, we just had a presentation to them a week or so ago that got cut short, and we're going back to meet with them next week. And it seems like it's going to be challenging, I think, to get this thing adopted before the election, but we'll see what they want to do. I think we're just going to kind of plan to move along at this, along this timeline. So at least we're kind of, in a good spot by the early fall. We can come back to this.
Just a quick,
yeah.
This actually, go to the next slide, because that
Yeah.
was where my question was.
Yeah.
The ongoing thing at the top,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have
Yeah.
enough input to, is there actually going to be any input? And then two,
Yeah.
you're going to be able to incorporate it in any meaningful way.
Yeah, the Maritime Task Force is actually in a pretty good place compared to a lot of the other things going on. I think, or at least it's a little more predictable, particularly because Eileen is running it, and
I mean, it's the Forest Drive Eastport one that I'm worried about, because
that one, I mean, I've been,
that in and of itself was, to me, a harbinger of what's going to happen when you dump this thing on the city council.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, Sally and I have been going to all the meetings. I think most of the recommendations are workable. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say, but they should be. Well, actually, I should say, I don't know that it needs to be adopted by city council. I mean, I think basically they're tasked with producing a report with the understanding that it would feed into the comprehensive plan, but I don't know that there's council action needed to sort of resolve their work.
I wouldn't really worry about council action, just more on that particular thing. But
yeah,
I mean, if they think that there's something, I mean, I don't know where that thing stands and what's going to come out of it, if anything. But if that, because of how that was received, if the result of that doesn't somehow get reflected in a meaningful way, we're going to do that. The same process is going to happen all over again. Is what
I understand. Yeah. No, I mean, it's all I can say is, as of now, I think the majority of what's in there is pretty workable for the comp plan. And, I think it doesn't faze me to integrate a lot of what they're suggesting. But I would say, we're trying to keep tabs on that, and the Affordable Housing Task Force as well, which, is really trying to move along pretty rapidly. But and I know they want to wrap up in the spring or early spring, but I don't know for sure if that's going to happen. But we're coordinating with them. We've shared kind of the recommendations we have, and we're trying to make sure we understand what might be coming out of that ahead of time, knowing that they're kind of an independent body, but we just want to be prepared. And then the Conservancy Greenway survey and mapping, that survey has wrapped up. We have the suggestions from that. We're evaluating them and just kind of understanding if there are any hard conflicts, but also just trying to prioritize and create a kind of a methodology for sort of prioritization, and ultimately putting together a map that integrates the suggestions with our existing conservation easements and our park system and our bikeways. That's really important, that this isn't just this is not a standalone thing. It's really important that's integrated with our other public facilities. which brings up the public facilities ordinance, the APF update. And that one is, it's ongoing. You know, we have a meeting tomorrow on the parks piece with the working group that Sally organized. And that one, you know, I think we're in a pretty good place on updating the parks piece. The transportation piece is another one, and vehicular and non-vehicular. And, you know, I think some of them are going to be probably pretty challenging to resolve, but we're trying to get the ones that are more clear as to how we can do them. Where the deficiencies are pretty clear. And then, and we're actually hoping to, you know, the intent is to give City Council an update on that next week when we meet with them. And then the Eastport Terrace Harbor House Choice Neighborhood Master Plan. I mean, I don't have any real news on that except that we're looking to advance that. We've been talking with HACA quite a bit, and you know, we're planning to move forward with that grant application through HUD to do the Choice Neighborhood Master Plan. But I mean, I think it's definitely a reach, but you know, I know that there's a new HUD secretary. I don't know, maybe we'll be able to get her to Annapolis at some point. And I don't know, I think it's certainly worth a shot. And even if it doesn't come through, I think the ideas behind that are something we want to pursue and find a way to plan for. Just kind of going over this slide again as kind of the primary structure of the comp plan. I don't think I shared this last time, but this just kind of gives a snapshot of what that looks like in a typical chapter. This is a snapshot of something from our draft housing chapter, and the recommendations are actually cut short, and there's more recommendations than these for this particular goal, but it just gives you a sense of what we mean by goals, metrics, and recommendations. And this is what we would be having for all of the chapters. This is another thing that I'm excited to be including in the comp plan. It's something that would come towards the end. It's a summary of all the recommendations or actions, as we are calling them. It's a way of basically institutionalizing a process to kind of move towards implementation. You know, it's important to kind of acknowledge all of these things, particularly responsibilities. It's as somebody pointed out that I should adjust, but we need to have a lead on responsibility. I think it's important to acknowledge that there's other partners beyond city staff, but from the community. But I think we would identify a lead for responsibility, and then it's also important to acknowledge what has to happen before this action happens in the prerequisites. But I think this will go a long way towards helping staff, you all, elected officials, residents, to kind of follow along what we're trying to do here. This was not.
Eric, can I just jump in? I like this slide a lot too. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I like the time frame suggestion. You know, in addition to having a lead, but is there going to be something that defines short term, midterm, and long term?
Yeah. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. Yeah, there would be a key here for that, and the level of investment too. These are pretty standard ways of accounting for these actions in comprehensive plans, but yeah, it does need a key. That would certainly. Typically, you know, short term would be like 1 to 3 years or 1 to 2 years, and then midterm like 3 to 5 years, and long term more than that. Okay, so the main meat of this brief presentation, I just have a couple slides left. You know, I showed this slide last time, the big idea being that we're trying to embed other types of criteria into our land development code, our zoning code, essentially, for, you know, what kind of predictability that we want? What type of qualities do we want in our built fabric that may not be in our current zoning code, or that we try to negotiate when something comes up? And this is a kind of a current strategy towards that. I spent a lot of time talking about the value of mixed use development in the last presentation I gave a month ago. I underscored how this has been essentially a goal for the last 20 plus years in Napa, at least the comprehensive plans over the last 20 years that I've looked at, and probably going much farther back than that. For the main reasons that it's higher performing land use, fiscally, it situates conveniences and opportunities closer where people live. It encourages walkability and active transportation. It has a huge environmental benefit to the city by concentrating development, but certainly has to go hand in hand with protecting places that are assets as well. This again is sort of a draft land use map that highlights the areas that we think are appropriate candidates for mixed use development. And this is different than a zoning map. This is essentially looking at what we want to see on these parcels. Now, mixed use is a very broad term, and so these infill place types are a way of breaking that down and getting at this kind of character that we're looking for. Essentially how this evolved was in looking at these proposed mixed use parcels and the varying contexts that where they're located, and recognizing that it's a pretty diverse bunch of contexts. You could look at any of these parts of the city and say, hey, one parcel might be significantly different in terms of what kind of context drivers it has on its on what should be developed there. And so, this is again, kind of a snapshot at what these might be in the context that they're responding to. I think that the housing priority one is kind of important to clarify, because it's this one, and I would say all of these ultimately would be defined through a chart and additional narrative that gives more information about the kind of mix of uses that is desired. It's what percentage of residential versus retail or other use, institutional perhaps. What's the expectation on mobility and streetscape character? There's a lot of environmental provisions already in place in the city and the state, but coming from city and state regulations. But we could talk. This is a place where we could talk more about a desired tree canopy or other measures that might go above and beyond what's already spelled out. So, with housing priority, the idea is that these are places that should be predominantly residential, but that we believe there's an opportunity for some neighborhood retail conveniences for those residents that would potentially minimize, trips that they have to make elsewhere. And certainly improved open space will go along with any kind of redevelopment. I think, one of the goals here is not just to simplify the way development happens and improve how it this sort of I've mentioned minimizing the kind of the battles that happen typically, but we're dealing with ultimately 31 zoning codes for the city, has grown over time, and thinking of ultimately about ways of simplifying that. And so we kind of have that in mind, when we're developing these place types and kind of looking at which of these zoning districts could ultimately be replaced by these kind of form-based codes. I should have characterized them that from the beginning, but that's essentially what these are. They're form-based districts that are based on their context and would lead to development that we want in these locations. So, the B zones are a repeat of the ones up here, but ultimately, I think we're looking at a net reduction of like nine zones, and this is not. I just need to underscore that the comprehensive plan is not a zoning code, but we're making recommendations for how we would update our zoning code, and that would be that would require more discussion with council and with you all for sure. But
Just for clarity, I'm not sure I understand how this chart works.
yeah, that's fair. I've just so
If you get rid of something, if something goes, it's just not
May-
clear at a glance what went away.
Maybe go to the next slide, Eric. I don't know if that would.
oh no, this is the one I had kind of, yeah.
The one with the
I was
boxes. Oh, okay.
I was figuring out a different way of doing this. I may have the way I was doing it before may have actually been more clear. What I'm doing is essentially pulling the zones from the long existing list. I'm kind of pulling out the ones that would be met by these new kind of place type districts. So essentially MX neighborhood could replace our existing MX district and our business revitalization district, which is a pretty small area currently. The MX gateway could replace B1, B2, B3, and B3
Right.
corridor design.
So, just maybe I could.
Yeah.
You send that to me, I could give you a sense of why I didn't understand it. It just
Yeah.
a little, it's more chartsmanship than anything, I guess. I like the idea.
Yeah, no, I struggled with the best way to communicate this. But yeah, I guess I'm just trying to, I am just trying to show which of these existing zones, sort of being addressed by these new zones. And you could, the intent is just to show exactly how many zones we have that might be, I don't want to call them superfluous, but, or even redundant, but they could be satisfied in other ways. And
Yeah, I get it. Just needed some explanation.
yeah. And I think that the point I made the last time that we met that I want to underscore is just that there's a lot of unpredictability in some of these, particularly the B districts. The shopping centers currently are B2, and it's something that I think is an issue that a developer comes in and they propose what they can do by right, and it's met with pretty stiff resistance. And so I think that these could help us, I think, get to more of a compromise on what makes sense in the city. And that's kind of the intent. I think the last slide is really just to say that another piece of this is doing these case studies in the comprehensive plan that would look at these 5 sites as demonstration locations of those place types, and essentially show scenarios that would be built around those guidelines. And I think these are not, in the last comp plan we had opportunity zones where we're really trying to steer development. This is kind of acknowledging that we're not very good at predicting where things are going to happen. We shouldn't really be in that business, but we want to acknowledge where it makes most sense, and be prepared for that. And these are 5 sites where we think change is sorely needed, and we want to try to get ahead of things. So
Eric, let me see if I can understand. Can you go back a slide?
Sure.
Is what you're proposing, first of all, they're design guidelines? Is that what you're proposing here? Or they're more than design guidelines, because what you're saying is that in a current B district, you're proposing that they become MX, and then they become basically an MX gateway, and that you provide design guidelines, form-based code design guidelines that would apply in these 1, 2, 3, 4 B districts, which are now MX gateway.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you are recommending zoning changes, because you get rid of the B zones or whatever, these 4 B zones, and you change them into BMX gateway.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
So then what you would be asking us to do is to look carefully at each one of these and make sure that it should be included in one of the MX types. Okay. And secondly, that we will look pretty carefully at what the design guidelines are, because you're really changing the zone. You're changing it from one that says, well, it's a B zone, you can't have residential, and you're changing it into one that's an MX zone that says, if you want to do residential, you can do it here. Am I getting this correctly?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's fair. I mean, I think it should get the scrutiny. We're not providing the exact level of detail that these are going to have is not going, I would not say they're going to be design guidelines. We're going to be providing goals that we're aiming to meet in these. The guidelines would be far more detailed, like maximum height, material qualities and setbacks and things like that. I mean, we're really aiming for goals that we're trying to meet that would define these districts, but they're going to be defined in some way. I mean, I think it's a little bit of semantics, but typically design guidelines are, far more rigorous in the kind of detail that they offer. So we're not going to get into that with the comprehensive plan.
But wait a minute. If it's an MX, if it's an MX zone, is any more flexibility provided simply because it's an MX zone? And then we can then say, well, we have these goals for this particular MX type of zone, and you got to meet them. I mean, I'm a little concerned about what if this is just a kind of an academic exercise, in vacant space, or if this is something that's really going to get established in a zone, and a guy, developer comes in and says,
yeah,
what can I do here?
Yeah, I think that the ultimate consequence of it wouldn't really, it would need to lead to a rezoning, for it to have ultimate consequence. I think, I think a lot about how this document, the comprehensive plan, could be used by various boards and commissions, particularly Planning Commission, as a tool for you to evaluate development proposals that come through. And, I would hope that you see a development proposal, you look at the comprehensive plan, you see that it is identified in our future land use map as one of these place types, and that tells you something about what is the expectation for what should happen here. Even prior, even if we don't have a rezoning, I mean, it's going to have that kind of value. So, you're weighing lots of things, I think, when you are reviewing these development proposals. But I mean, that's short of it leading to rezoning. I mean, that's kind of what it would be. It would be a guide for you to assess if this is an appropriate development. I mean, but there's probably going to be some, there may be some inconsistency. I mean, that's, I think, the nature of it with the existing zoning code. So
I just want to try to get more practical here.
Mhm.
I don't quite understand what value this has when an application comes before us and a guy says, well, it's an MX corridor zone, or I can do by right. I don't have to prioritize walkability, because that's not what's required in the current P or PM or whatever. You
Yeah.
follow? And we, and we say, we have these goals, and he says, I don't care.
Yeah.
So by right, I can do something that's, doesn't have walkways.
Well, Bob, I think the idea is to codify these.
How, where,
Yeah.
and what level? I'm not sure how, where.
What I was
Well,
going to say is,
if we get buy-in on the ideas, and we still have a lot of more work to do to develop the place types, then we would rezone MX and BR to MX-N. And there would be, certain type of use table and bulk table and site design guidelines associated with being in the MX neighborhood.
So you would rezone B1, 2, 3, and B3 CD, and you'd rezone them as MX Gateway.
Yes,
Okay, because that's
assuming
what,
we get consensus on this direction.
right.
okay, that's cool. We need to talk more about what's involved in an MX housing priority. But,
Right.
When
Like
the
everything else in the
landowner
strategic
come,
Like
when-
everything else in the strategic plan, it's a suggestion. And whether, if it gets adopted, then people essentially like the suggestion and they can go forward and do the tactical approaches to implement it.
I get that, and it's a great opportunity to do something that we've wanted to do for a long time. I mean, several different goals, and it's a great opportunity, but I think to make the opportunity understandable,
Mhm.
we need to make clear what exactly we're proposing to do here.
Yeah, I think we need to work more on the place types and developing a visual lexicon of what that means.
Yeah.
So that the developer knows exactly what it is that he can do and what's expected of him.
The developer and the communities.
Yeah, okay, right, okay, sorry, yes. I
Yeah,
agree.
they can look at a picture and read the description and be like, yes, that's what I want here. And then the developer looks at it and says, yes, that's what I'm going to build here.
You know,
Okay.
And I think it's a great way to, as Sally's saying, does two things. It kind of, it tells the developers where we want certain things. We want you to build this kind of thing over here. And, if we add incentives for them to build what we want where they want it, where we want it, that's going to save us a lot of time and hopefully energy in fighting things, because we'll all have sort of thought about it ahead of time. I mean, I think the feeling is now we just, we a lot of times just react to applications. This is going to be kind
Yeah.
of guiding and providing incentives for development where we really want it and need it.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I think when Bob when you were talking about this, hypothetical, developer saying, well, the code doesn't say anything about walkability. And I mean, that's the exact point I think we're trying to make here, that there is so much that is not said in the current code that could be reinforced. I mean, typically the comp plan does have recommendations on the kind of city we want. We want a more walkable city. We want, more access to certain places and so forth. if those things are scattered throughout the comp plan, the idea is that they could be embedded in our land use recommendations so that, I mean, you say all these things already in a way. I mean, when I've watched the reviews of development proposals, I mean, you're highlighting a lot of the values that we want to, you know, embed in these projects. But this, I would hope, gives you a little bit more, you know, tool to reinforce that stuff, you know, so it's not just you saying, well, it's just right that this is a certain way, it's going to, you know, improve this place for this reason. You know, these, I would hope, reinforce a lot of the things that you're already saying. So,
well, I think it's got to do more than reinforce. I think it's got to require.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, ultimately, we're going towards cutting down the number of zones, and those which can be incorporated into these 5 types.
Yeah.
Okay. And these 5 types are MX, and this is what's required, and this is what you can do. I mean, we've got to get there. I mean,
yeah.
And I think that this is going closer than surely we went in 2009, which was just a lot of like aspirations. This is beginning to get real.
And you're right.
Several very large, you know, issues that are going to come up. Bay Ridge, West Annapolis, and, you know, you've identified them. Plus a lot of little ones. Like, remember when you and I and Sally met, we talked about West Street in my little neighborhood. It's like, we could change the zone. It's actually one of these MXs, whatever, I haven't figured it out yet, neighborhood maybe. And we could get really what's needed and what people want. But
yeah.
The zone needs to be changed.
Yeah, well, I think what I really, what I think is critical based on what I'm hearing, I think you know, even if we're really committed, we get something that has consensus and we're really committed to moving it towards a rezoning ordinance. I think we still need to better define, you know, how does this function in regard to the zoning code? You know exactly how is somebody going to use this? How is a community going to use this? How is, you know, I think that would be very valuable.
So maybe, you know, we need to maybe break it up and as you look at MX neighborhood and you start to really think about what goes into MX neighborhood, bring that to us, you know, and we'll hash out some stuff. And then the next time you come with gateway and then corridor and blah, blah, blah. So we can divide it up a little bit.
Yeah.
And show us the typologies, the building sizes, the kinds of things that you're thinking of.
Okay.
Break it up a bit. Now, I know it's a lot on you, but by God, you're young and strong.
Well, I do have help here. I'm not the only one doing this. It's, you know, we have some consultants and, you know, so.
And on some of your slides, you know, Village Square, maybe you may want to add West Annapolis, but
yeah.
But be that as it may, this is draft. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. By the way, in your earlier thing about the studies which are ongoing, I have 2 things.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, you need to add the West Annapolis master plan, which actually has probably got an end date to it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's in the next month, really. I mean, I didn't include it because it's technically part of the comprehensive plan, but you're right. I should highlight that here.
Yeah, it's going to be part of the comp plan, just like the Maritime Task Force stuff is going to become, quote, part of the comp plan. Now, but all of these, let me think. Well, the ordinance update may come to us, but and the Eastport Terrace master plan may come to us, but these task force studies, I mean, they just come to us, but basically they were authorized by the city council, correct?
Yeah. That's
Okay,
right.
so they're going to report to city council, correct?
That's right.
That's right. Yeah.
All right, does it, in terms of timing, does it make sense to have the Forest Drive Eastport people come and make a presentation to us? And then we can send a recommendation to council, but it's just a recommendation. Does it make sense to add that step to it or not? You follow me? It's another
Yeah.
step. It's another month.
I mean, I guess
Um,
it's
Yeah, we can, I mean, I think it is a good idea to come to you, for them to come to you. If, I'm just not sure what exactly the timeline is. We're trying to find another meeting, and I think it's going to be our last, or maybe second to last in late February, early March. I don't know when the plan is to go to council and exactly what the council is going to do, but would that be it'd be good to hear their recommendations. And then we can explain how we've incorporated a lot of those already in what we're doing with the comp plan. So do you have a preference for when they come to you, Bob?
I mean, I'm not looking to make a whole lot more work, do you know what I mean? But for Christ, we spent so much time on Forest Drive Eastport. I don't know. I would be happy if you reported to us what the Affordable Housing Task Force has to say. I mean, it's fine with me. I don't need to have 20 people telling me what's up. And the Maritime Task Force is a little different because it's so well organized and probably funded. And it's going to result in some very specific changes to zoning, to the zoning code, not to to the table of uses,
right,
definitions and so forth. And that's all stuff that has to come to us anyway. But that's a little different than these other kind of vaguer task forces. I don't know. I'd like to hear what they're doing. I'd like to hear what their recommendations and the ones you think are good or not good. I'd like to hear from you on that. That'd be fine with me. I mean, what do my fellows have to say?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind a curated view of that.
Okay. Well, we do have Eric lined up for the first Planning Commission meeting of every month. So I'm sure in the next couple of months, we could probably use that time to sort of, as you say, curate recommendations of these. I mean, maybe if those are going to be finished in March, so maybe in April or, sometime like that, we could summarize a lot of that work.
Yeah, and I mean, unless you desire to slow things down, that's up to you. But I wouldn't want it coming to us slow down the whole comp plan process. But I mean, we're going to look at this thing anyway, and their recommendations are going to be absorbed into the comp plan. Why don't we learn about it a little earlier?
Bob, I would agree. I'd sort of like to see this. I think our chairman is going to shoot us, but yeah.
Well, I mean, the compromise is that we don't have to hear from, all of these people.
Right.
But Eric and Sally can really tell us, well, this is what that task force did. Here's what they're recommending.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, that sounds pretty doable.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good. I mean, and we'll be seeing you the first of every month. So cool.
It's a date.
The date, hey, I got a date tomorrow morning with you, right?
Yeah.
Right?
I'll be there.
All right. Well, listen, thanks. I mean, just personally, I really appreciate the kind of thinking that's been going through this. And I think you're making real progress towards the goals that we've been talking about for the past 10 years. Thank you, man. I mean, it's just, I'm trying to drive it towards a resolution.
Yeah.
Sometimes my impatience gets the better of me and, but nonetheless, that's what I do.
Yeah. We all want that. I think we're.
Yeah, because we want to get it done, and the sooner it gets done, the better chance it has of passing earlier. And we can identify what are going to be really the hot topics.
Right.
And evade them or deal with them, or I don't know, decide whether it gets done before or after the election. I don't, that's later. But hey man, I think it's great. I think what's going on in the city is really, really good. I mean, I've been telling people that this is the best planning department that I can remember for over 20 years. You're thinking more ahead. You're thinking more about getting stuff actually done. I've said, I think it's working better than any planning department I've ever had. And now Diane's enforcement issues are always going to be there. But as we learned, by the way, just as a footnote, as we learned with whomever it was, that when we put conditions on an approval, those conditions have to go onto the plat maps so that the inspectors know what to look for. Because that's the loop, the circle wasn't joined at the end. And I think that's just such a simple thing, but yeah, we got to do that, And I think what happened and is happening on Annapolis Street, good. It's been good stuff. Okay. I don't know.
Thanks.
I bored everybody to death. I'm sorry. My apologies, Clyde. All right. Is that it?
I couldn't have said it better myself.
I think you could have. No, I'm just kidding.
All right. Hey, guys, thanks. Thanks a lot. I don't know. I don't have an agenda. I can't imagine that there's anything else we need to do. Anybody got anything else that they want to do?
Nope, I'm all set.
All right, great. Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.